that area because of the proximity to Bush Airport. So we do appreciate you being able to join us this morning. We'll continue to follow that breaking news. If we find out any other details on that breaking news scene, of course, we will bring them to you here at 9 a.m. or at 10 or at 11 a.m. Here on Eyewitness News. And we wanted to get to this other breaking news story that has been going on all morning long down in Stafford. We know that 2 people are dead after a call to 911 in Stafford led to a standoff between police and a suspect who we are told opened fire at police once they arrived. Now, ABC 13 reporter Chaz Miller has been there for several hours this morning and got the very latest from police. Here's his update.
So now that Stafford Road is reopened, we're able to get closer to the house where this investigation continues.
Good morning, everyone. How are y'all doing?
Good morning.
Well, welcome back. Hopefully, hopefully you all enjoyed doing the current event. They seem to be nice for everyone who turned them in. Uh, was it hard for y'all? Was it difficult? Do you have a good idea about what's going on? Are you waiting to see what I say about you? It. What do you think? All right. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward stuff. It's I'm just waiting. I'm just looking for everyone's opinion on everything and stuff like that. I want you to just the whole idea is for you to keep up with the news. I know it's at times it's not the most fun thing to do, which is to keep up with the news. But I think it's important to keep up with the news, and it's important to know what's going on. And it's helpful to just uh, understand what's happening. A lot of times, the things going to affect, like right now, we have Ten Commandments in the classroom, or students don't can't have their cell phones in the classroom, and a lot of parents are bothered by some of these things. But when these things were happening, and they were having the hearings, and they were going through all that, um, we didn't see all of the parents out there and the outrage and things like that, mostly because folks just weren't paying attention to what's going on in the actual news. And the whole idea is if you know what's going on in the news, if you see what's happening, you probably can't prevent it from happening. Um, um, but you probably could also be the one voice who gets everybody riled up on Facebook or something like that. I don't know, right? And then get them out there to go and fight against these things. Um, but at least you'll be in the know and you can get yourself ready for it and not feel like something was sprung on you real fast and you had no idea that it was going to happen. So, um, and that's the whole idea of it. Um, okay, any questions about anything? All right. Okay, then. We'll get going very soon. We get going with everything. We'll continue chugging along, trucking along, or moving along, in a lecture and things like that. And um, yeah, so we'll keep moving along and ultimately get to where we need to be and things like that. And yes, I agree with you. It is. it is easier to give an opinion. My thing is this here. The whole idea is that many of you will never do this ever again once you get out of this class, and you take both of those classes, then you will not take any government classes or deal with anything in the government forever. And I just want you guys, I want you all to kind of be informed, to understand what's happening in the world, so that when you do go out and you finally give up on government and everything else, then you will understand that, then you at least have an understanding about it and things like that, a decent understanding. Now, I I always get very interesting students. Um, Let me see. How can I say this? So students, they sometimes go they sometimes go out and they choose you know interesting things to focus on, uh, uh, current events and things like that. Um, and it's funny because because my student in my other class um, turned in a current event um, uh, yesterday, and I was like, okay, this is interesting. So I wanted to share with you all, which I talk about this at times when I'm talking about weird laws in Texas, um, but I figured I'd share it with you all, just so you'll know how far Texas will go to intrude in your everyday life. And here it is, as you can see. Um, The article is in the Houston Chronicle called "Texas Lawmakers Still Don't Want You to Spice Up Your Nighttime Routine." And in Texas, we have a law that you can only have up to six um, toys, in the bedroom or whatever. You can only have up to six. If you have any more than that, it's illegal. Now, the thing is, like, yeah, Texas, as it says, Texas dealing with things like money laundering and, a drunkenness and all these things. But apparently, this is one of the things that they have on there, right? And this went into effect, a long time ago in the 70s. It was updated in 2003. And as you can see, um, well, right. And as you can see, you can only have up to six, right? Or it's going to be a felony. Or I'm sorry, you can have up to five, or it's a felony, and things like that. So, and owning these things are illegal, right? Um, a judge ruled in 2008, as you can see, that it's hard to enforce this. We've had cases. I don't know if people are riding around uh, like Avon ladies, or like they're selling Tupperware or whatever, and they just have a boatload of them in the trunk, just riding around selling them. I don't know if that'll get you in prison, but yeah, this is something that is illegal, and it's on the books and things like that. So if you didn't know, then now you know. You're welcome, people. The issue is not, as you see, as they finish out their article saying it's not about what it is, right? It's because they said, why is it on the books? Well, because it can be there. And it's a lot of weird things on the books that we have there that aren't always enforced and things like that. I don't know, but I'm almost certain that, um, because I haven't looked into it, but of late. But I'm almost certain that it is. I mean, it is illegal to steal a person's horse. At one point in time, it was a capital offense. I don't know if it's still that, but it might still be on the books as that. Which is the craziest thing ever. And you know, so uh, there's a lot of weird laws here in the state, and each state has their own weird laws, and that's one of ours. There we go, folks. You can, however, carry a sword now. I mean, that was passed a few years ago. So, um, if you're someone who was looking to use a sword, then there we go, people. All right, let's get to our lecture. Um, okay, I believe that we left off around here, right? No, we talked about Modi, right? I think we stopped at Modi. All right. Am I right? Because I think I'm doing better now. We stopped at Modi just to make sure. Uh, um, yeah, you see, I'm getting better, Brianna. Uh, communist society. That's what that's what they remember of me. All right, then. So communist society. So yeah, ultimately so we finished that off at that part, and as we move along here, we get to this uh, slide here where um, you know, Davison. Okay, what is happening here? All right, Davison talks about the state of Texas, right? And we're going to talk about this more and more and go through all of the things about the South and how Texas is and things like that. And Texas shares a lot of these qualities that other states in the South share. I mean, have. And there we go. It says history like God and nature has been both generous and unkind to the South. Um, so we have a contradiction of values and beliefs, as we call them. Um, J. David J. David Woodard writes in his book, The New Southern Politics, that when Abraham Lincoln asked for a united front and unity, he was met with the secession of the South. And when FDR said that a third of our nation was ill housed, ill clad, and ill nourished, he was talking about the South. And when MLK spoke about racial inequality or equality, he was no doubt talking about the South. So as we look at the history of the South, right, is a history of slavery, class consciousness, white supremacy, segregation, and poverty. But we also have a history of charity and family and manners, humor, a Southern hospitality, right, and religion, right? So this here is what we call the contradiction of values and ideas. So we have this on one side, but we still have all these other things on the other side as well, right? Basically, like what is the South known for? What does the South have, and things like that. Even till this day, right? There's a lot of these values that we still have. If you go up north, it's different from being down south in terms of just manners and things like that. And there's more, right? The South has more churchgoers and more residents who attend church, or as Time Magazine put it, um, the Southerners are the most church-going people in the entire nation. But we also lead the nation in gun violence, right, and murder and racial antipathy. We have some of the the best orators and writers, right, in the history of this nation, but also have some of the worst schools. When you look at Texas, Texas hasn't been known to have wealthy people. They've been known to have the super rich, right? They're in another category. Chandler Davison talks about this in Race and Class, um, and politics in Texas. where we have the super rich, right? But we also have the history of poverty. We have the poorest, the two poorest cities in the country and the poorest county in Texas. And even with that, we get someone with who is, who calls herself a progressive, right? And that if she was uh, around in the 1860s or 1850s, she would have been an abolitionist. But she also wrote that she's grappling with the outcome of the Civil War because she is a grandchild of a lost war. So she even has this thing going on in her head, which leads me to believe that she probably wouldn't have been an abolitionist, right? But still, it's the contradiction of values and ideas, right? All right, here we go, people. So this is Ralph Yarbrough, right? He's a pretty important guy. Um, and I'll tell you why he's important. It's not because of his political views. It's because of his ability at the time to get things done. Now, he's said to be the most influential liberal in the history of Texas. He had the support of liberals and moderates. He was a Democrat, so people assumed that he was one of them, even though he wasn't at times. So he had the backing of many people in Texas. He was a senator in Texas for a long time, 1957 to 1971, right? And here's the thing: he launched, he put forth the bill to launch the war on cancer. He was the sponsor of OSHA, right? He came up with the Community Mental Health Centers Act that ultimately financed a lot of mental health centers and things like that, and to ultimately modernize them, right? He put in place a bill to finance education of handicapped children and veteran and elderly and the less fortunate. This dude created Head Start. Head Start. Okay. He was one of the co-authors in favor of the Civil Rights Act, or I'm sorry, he voted in favor of the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Act, and he opposed the war in Vietnam. Right, he was clearly an environmentalist. He did a lot of stuff with Lady Bird in terms of beautifying the state of Texas. He was the major force behind major education bills like the National Defense Education Act, which ultimately created the financial aid system that we use now for college. He sponsored he sponsored the Cold War GI Bill, which paid for the training and college education of millions of veterans. But what he's really known for, right? Um, well, and before I get there, I'll tell you this here. He also went to the floor. So I got three things to tell you. One, he went to the floor of the Senate and said that a third of our state can't take part in the American dream. A third of our state are being left behind and left out. All right. And I'm paraphrasing. Right. And he says, these people were here well before any of us made it here, well before Sam Houston got here. And he went through this whole speech. And with that, he was saying that a third of the state that doesn't even speak English. And with that, he created ESL. Yeah, the ESL classes that teach anyone who doesn't speak English. Yeah, that was that guy. Now he's known for two things. One, I mean, two major things that I like to point out. One, he got into a fight with Strom Thurmond on the floor of the Senate. I think he had him in a headlock. So that's one thing. Uh, and the other thing is this year because we didn't have anything. It was supposed to go forward. You know, um, his bill was supposed to go. It was gonna go. He was gonna put it forth if he won, and he had it written out and everything, but he didn't get a chance to do it the previous year. He had a universal health care bill that was gonna put forth, and it was one election, a few months, a recess away from being put forth and passed. And if you listen to everything I just ran off and read, you can see how effective he was and things like that. Remember, Texas represented the South. Texas represented, you know, all that there. So when a Texas senator wanted something, the Texas senator got it, which probably explains the power of LBJ as well as senator, right? So there we go. Anyway, that's rough, y'all, bro, people. So we have 9 regions in Texas, which I'm sure that many of you have checked out in your textbook. We have the East Texas, we have Gulf Coast, and South Texas. And I don't know where all of you are from. I don't know if all of you are from, which side you're from. Um, I'm one of these Gulf Coast people, all right, from the chemical side, area. It's normally on the water because uh, you know, the ships are coming in with all this stuff and everything is shipping out. Plus, a lot of times the water is used to cool down the plants as well because these plants they can overheat. Um, we got East Texas and places like that, and then we have the Southwest, right, which is the El Paso, which is over in that area there, and we have West Texas, the German Hill Country. All right. And as you can see, we have 9 of these regions. We have the Panhandle, um, North Texas, and Central Texas, right? So North Texas, Central Texas, and Gulf Coast. These are the areas that are bringing in a lot of our money and stuff like this, right? You got a lot of high tech stuff that's going on there, and as you can see, Central Texas, it says it's a core area. Lots of high tech industries as well. So we got a lot of good things there. So for your exam, when you're taking that and you're wondering, okay, so what's going to be on the exam, or am I going to have to write out all of these regions and things like that? The answer is going to be no, you will not have to write out every region, but you may need to know, um, you know, the actual number of regions. Or maybe if I say, what's the petrochemical region, which one of these, and then you say, oh, it's Gulf Coast, right? So have to write out every. It could be written that, or you could see a multiple choice, in that manner. Right? And there they are, right there. So I'll tell you. So we're supposed to have this train. I don't know why I'm showing up in a different place now. But anyway, but we're supposed to have a train um, uh, that was supposed to run from Houston to Dallas. It was a light rail that we were trying to get, and I think it was going to take like an hour and a half or something like that to get there, an hour and 25 minutes or something, which is pretty quick, I would say. And it would work out well for anyone working, looking and saying, man, I like to work in Houston, or I like to work in Dallas, or I want to work, wherever, in that area, and I can just hop on a train. It takes me an hour and a half to ultimately get there. Well, the problem is that it's a city in the middle that wanted a stop there. They wanted us to stop, and they didn't want to approve the area, and so they still been working on that. But for years, I mean, what 2018, 19, it looked like it was gonna get done. Everything has shut down, and I don't know. I guess it's been a reset, but we were looking at a train running from Houston to Dallas. They didn't have anything running from Houston here to this area, but Houston to Dallas, it's gonna be about an hour and 30 minutes, hour and 25 minutes, and man, we're in traffic that long at times. But imagine getting to work and you can't find a job and you're like, I can go work in Dallas. But this place, it was a small city that wanted to stop there because they wanted to turn it into Chicago. Chicago became this huge city. Many argue because it was a stop on the train, ride. It was one of those stops, so everyone just kind of just went there and things like that. Sure, there's other reasons why Chicago made it to where they were, but that's one of the reasons that they say, and that city was trying to do that. So we'll see how it works out. And I don't think that the train rail can like bend or turn or go a certain way. It has to like run straight for it to work. I'm assuming. I have no idea. I don't know anything about that, but I just know. Hopefully, we all look and realize that other options would be a good thing. We've actually come a long way. There are a lot of people who were opposed to electric vehicles for a long time because they were all gas people, and it seems as though Elon Musk has changed many folks' mind when it comes to even electric vehicles. So that works out well. All right. Any questions about that lecture? All right. Cool. So the Constitution. The Constitution. So a constitution, as we look at this, right, is a legal structure of government which establishes its power and authority as well as the limits on that power. So what does that mean? So a constitution is essentially something that places limits on government. Like if government had no limits, there'll be no need for a constitution. That's the only reason why we have a constitution is to place limits on government and things like that. So I want you to also remember that, when you hear about a constitution is a reaction to something that has just happened. So we have a Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence is essentially a list of grievances, right? I'm upset. I'm very disappointed. I'm pissed off, whatever you want to say, right? And this is why. And you kind of list every one of those things, right? I'm upset because of this. I'm upset because of that. I'm upset with this. And you take that outline, which is the Declaration of Independence, and you say, I'm very upset about this. And you take the outline, and now you're going to write out a paper addressing each one of those things. That stuff would ultimately be put into your constitution. And now I can have a trial by jury. Now I don't have any troops in my home anymore hanging out. Now, we're going to address, many other things, but ultimately that's what the Constitution does. It is in reaction to something that has happened, which is the Declaration of Independence has already listed. Now we're going to fix it and just understand that each constitution written over and over again is in reaction to something that has just happened. All right. All right. So what do constitutions do at the state level? Well, they basically let us know what each agency is going to do, what each branch of government is going to do. How many branches of government are we going to have? How are we going to handle these branches? Right? How do we, we're going to make sure that one branch doesn't have too much power, that there are some checks and balances. We're also going to say, ensure that the people have some sort of power in this system because it's supposed to be a democracy, right? And ultimately, who has the power over what? So we got all these things happening here, right? All these different groups. Ultimately, we know at the end of the day that the federal government can override things at times, um, but at the state level, we look at the rules and the laws that they currently have in place and decide who does what and which agency can handle things. All right, I'll tell you all, which I don't always do. This is an important slide, right? Because we're going to look at the five ways that Texas and American Constitution are alike. And let's go through those. The political power is derived from the people. Power is split into three separate branches of government. The three branches check and balance each other's political power. Government cannot violate the people's rights. And they both have a federalism in it, meaning they have two governments in it, right? They have two powers. When you look at as you can see here, power divided between the central government and regional government, and both governments exercise authority over its citizens. So, just to elaborate on federalism, so you can get a better idea about it. In our U.S. Constitution, we have the central government. The central government in any constitution is going to be the most powerful government. And in the U.S. Constitution, our United States Constitution, the central government is the federal government. And those regional governments would be the 50 states. In a state constitution, in our constitution here in Texas, because these are two different constitutions, right? We have a Texas Constitution and a U.S. an American or U.S. one. In our Texas Constitution, the central government would be the state government, and those regional governments would be local governments. And there are debates even at that level, right? You know, we argue over things at the state level. As well with our local government, right? So, it's a lot of arguments over who does what and who has what power, right? We have the federal government saying, well, we have the power over the states to do this here, and the states saying, no, you don't, and we have to hash that out. And then we had the same thing happen like about 11 years ago or so, right? We get the city of New Braunfels and Comal County saying, you cannot float on a river with beer bottles, I guess, or beer or something like that. I don't remember exactly what it was, right? But it was something like that. And the state government said, "Well, you don't have the power over the river." And the city government said, "We have a power over this part." And they were like, "No, you can't do that." They were like, "Yes, we can." And who wins that argument, right? Who gets to ultimately decide if you can float on a river with this or that?
The
Uh,
federal government?
I'm sorry?
The federal government?
Well, but this is an argument between the state of Texas and the city of New Braunfels and Comal County.
I guess the state of Texas, they still flow in the river with with bottles of beer.
Okay. Now, to your point, the federal government probably could come down and override and say, no, we own all that, right? I don't know if that's going to work. Clark says the state Supreme Court, that could possibly work. The problem is, Clark, is while you're waiting on the Supreme Court, uh, people are still getting tickets and still getting arrested. People are still getting fined. People are still getting banned from being in the river there. And the argument, the thing is this here, right? I would argue, yeah, it's the state's power. The state has the power over a river, but the problem is the city of New Braunfels and Comal County are cleaning up that portion of the river. They're going out there cleaning up water, cleaning out trash out of that portion. And since the city is using money, then there we go. There we go, Hannah. So we have, we don't really know who has it, but we do know who has the police out there arresting people, giving people the tickets for it.
Y'all, I didn't mean to interrupt, but y'all don't have in your Constitution who actually owns. I haven't looked through the whole Texas Constitution. It's as long as South Carolina's, but who actually owns the rivers? In South Carolina and the Commonwealth of Virginia, all rivers and lakes are owned by the state. They're state property. That's how they've resolved that. We had a couple of that too, but that was decades ago. Texas doesn't have that in theirs.
No, well, Texas, okay, so Texas is all about local government. A smaller government is the actual government that actually matters. The problem arises when the problem arises, Clark, when someone connected to someone in government gets a ticket. When someone connected to someone at the Congress gets a ticket. You see what I'm saying? That's when Congress tries to go in and override them because they don't like it. We just saw this happen um, in last session just a few months ago that they tried to put in place a law against stopping people from hunting for a deer or something like that because the dude tried to go out there and deer hunt and they told him no. So he was like, "I'll show you." He put a bill forward to try to override that. You see what I'm saying? So it's these weird things where you see people trying to overreach, but these are the same people that say local government is the best government. And the issue is that South Carolina probably have a lot of common sense, Clark. Um, and they're probably in session once a year at least, or all the time. Like we're only in session 140 days every other year. So it's like, what? So,
We have
but the city government's always in session.
everything in South Carolina is very centralized. It has been since the 1600s. So Texas has always been kind of decentralized. But we have our problems there. Got the 5 families that rule the state.
Well, I tell you all that South Carolina, um, as much flack as it gets, right? Because it did get started with the Civil War and all that. Uh, South Carolina has always been the actual leader when it came, you know, to a sort of rectifying racial issues. It was like the first state to put forth, a black person in Congress and then doing that. And like everything with South Carolina is kind of like it seemed like the state had to take control to prevent local government from doing things, but ultimately, South Carolina is a place to look to understand how the country, should go. At least, it started, that way in the 50s and the 60s or so, right? So, hey. I believe, yeah, James Clyburn is from there, and once the Democratic nomination got to South Carolina, that's whenever Joe Biden went there, and James Clyburn from South Carolina told the people to vote for Joe Biden, and after that, that led to Joe Biden winning the election. So, oh, see, there we go. Even Jesse Jackson is from there. So. Okay, so what's the difference between the U.S. and Texas Constitution? Well, I'll tell you. The U.S. Constitution, it can grow in power. The U.S. Constitution allows for the federal government to grow, to grab land from lower government. So I'm sorry, to grab power away from local government. If you think about it, Texas, the Texas, the school system used to be controlled by the states. But Texas wasn't doing good. George W. Bush, he didn't like it, so he decided, let me fix this with No Child Left Behind. And ever since then, the federal government has had an authority over education because they can take it, right? Ultimately, it authorizes Congress to enact a legislation that is necessary to carry out the powers of other branches. And by doing so, they're taking power away from a federal government. I mean, from state government, or they're taking power away from these lower governments. All right. So we have 3 types of power, right? We have exclusive power, which is power that the federal government has. We have power that is shared, which is concurrent power, and we also have the reserve power, which the only one that we're concerned about, since we're in Texas, which is the state power. And this comes from it comes from the 10th Amendment, which basically says any power that hasn't been given to the federal government uh, is a state power, essentially. All right. All right. Now, let's get into all the exciting stuff, people. This is what you came here for, right? You're like, I came here to hear about the constitutions of Texas. Here we go. So when you look at the constitutions, right? When you look in your textbook and when you look at this, right? A lot of history. Any of you who went to school in Texas, then you know that Texas history seemed to begin in 1836, right? But here, we're going to go over more than just the Constitution, right? 1836 and so forth, right? We're going to start with the 1827 Constitution because it is very important as well, right? These are all the constitutions over the state of Texas. Now, if I ask you how many constitutions were over the state of Texas, how many have we had? Then you all would write six, because I believe that your textbook starts with 1836. So I'll be nice and I'll just leave it to where it says that, right? So if you see that, it's six constitutions, but we're going to go over seven of them, right? And here it is. So the Constitution of 1827, right? Mexico, ultimately won its independence from Spain, and in 1821, and now we're gonna move forward, right? We're like, okay, so Mexico won its independence, then Mexico lost, then Mexico won its independence again in 1821, and now we're like, okay, cool. Now how are we gonna move forward? Well, we have to create a constitution. So they work together, and ultimately, you'll see the influence from the United States. 1827, right? We get a state constitution where Texas shares its constitution with Coahuila, I believe. And as you can see here, we have at the national level, right? We have a two-house legislator, which looks like ours, right? A president and a vice president, and we have a Supreme Court. So we have three branches of government in this Constitution at this level here in Mexico, right? So it's our national Constitution. Now, we also have to have a state constitution as well, right? Which we're going to go over. But if you look here, right, and the second bullet, it was kind of like the American Constitution, except in the U.S. Constitution, we didn't have a national religion, but here there was a national religion, Catholicism, which seemed kind of weird since Mexico won its independence from Spain, because the Spaniards came and basically murdered anyone who didn't want to be a Catholic and forced them into it. And then it became a national religion. Yes, the same argument could be made for many of the slave owners who took away the religion from black people and basically beat the Protestant religion into them. And yeah, so there we go. Our state constitution, right? We had three separate districts. We have a legislator, right? But it's only one body or one house. We have the governor, the vice governor, who serves 4 years. So ultimately, it kind of looks like the Constitution here in Texas. Also, kind of looks like the Constitution uh, of Nebraska, which is the only state that has a unicameral constitution. But anyway, all right, here we go. So I want you to pay attention to this here. It's a judicial power that was placed in the state courts. But let's get into the other part here. It says the Constitution guaranteed the citizens the right to liberty, security, and property and equality. Now, this is what I was telling you about. This is where it allows women to own land, women to inherit land and things, and it didn't automatically go to a man or to her son whenever he was the age of 13 or something like that, right? It is still her land, and this is something that the Mexican Constitution created, that the Mexicans put in their Constitution, that ultimately rolled over to our Constitution later on after Texas won his independence, which was, became one of the only, if not the only nation to allow women to inherit land and own land, and gave women the equality when it came to the property in terms of land rights. It also made Texas the first state, or one of the first states, right, to allow women to own that as well. Now, here we go. As you can see there, it says there was some constitutional language supported um, to curtail slavery. Now, why is this important? It's important because this is a big deal. In this Constitution, it basically said you got about 5 years, man. That's it. And then we're not going to have any more slaves in this country. My question to you all is, why would Mexico, why would the Mexicans put this in here to say, I don't want slavery in our country, in this new Constitution?
The reason was they didn't have that many slaves in that portion of in Mexico as whole. Also, they had a lot of poor peasants, and slavery would prevent those poor peasants from owning land, small chunks of land. The Spanish at one time had the peasants as serfs. So basically, what they were saying is, if you import all this cheap labor, you're going to crush the peasants who helped us overthrow the Spanish. And that's
Okay.
the Mexican part of it.
Okay. Well, here's the issue. When you look at this here and you look into it, you find that this wasn't the Mexicans weren't concerned with the importation of slavery. The Mexicans were concerned with the slaves that were currently there in Texas that was approved by the Spaniards being there. You see what I'm saying? So the Mexicans, and ultimately um, the weird Mexican government that was set up between 1821 and 1827. That wasn't really a government. That was kind of just operating, with these little small governments. They were concerned about these people who had come here with the slaves, with Moses Austin, and ultimately he died, and Stephen F. Austin. They weren't, but I guess my question that I'm asking is, or I guess I'll say this here. That probably, I won't say that's not a reason, but that didn't seem to be the main reason that the Mexicans put that into law. There was a bigger reason why they put that into law, and you kind of alluded to it. The Spaniards enslaved the Mexicans. They had been slaves for a while. This was the reason why they were like, we're not going to have slaves here, because they too had been enslaved. Now, the issue arose because, as we've seen from Stephen F. Austin's writings and things like this, he said, he went and argued in favor of it. The first 200 people immigrants to come to Texas, he ultimately said, we cannot do this without slaves. We're not going to be able to make it without slaves. we're not going to be able to survive without bringing these slaves with us to work. So they gave them about 5 years or so. You guys should be good by now, right? Um, Sam Houston, ultimately, this was his thing, right? He was like, I'm gonna try to work for it and work for it and work for it and see what I can do. And he got the approval because he had already had the approval with the Spanish. The Spanish, they ended up losing the war. Now he has to get the approval from the Mexican government. I remember being in class uh, seventh grade. I had a teacher, Miss Shepherd, and she smelled like cigarettes and coffee. Um, and I remember this, right? We were in class, and she says, "Who all think that Abraham Lincoln is a hero?" Right? And everyone's like, "Me," you know? And she's like, "Why?" Now, mind you, I'm from Galveston County. I'm from Ron Paul's district. I'm from where they used to call Rush Limbaugh a liberal. Um, I just want you to kind of get an idea about where I'm from. So Miss Shepherd asked the question, and she was like, "Why is he a hero?" And they're like, "Because he freed the slaves. He did this. He did all that." She said, "Well, Santa Anna, he did the same thing. He went to war because of slavery. All these heroes that you see at the Alamo, they were slave owners fighting to keep slavery, right?" Now we were in there like, what in the like what? So ultimately, she comes back a couple of days later and says these words here. I was told to recant my statement or I'll be forced to resign. So it really happened like that. He was really he really went to war with slavery and all that there. And yes, and she was no longer working there. She became a car saleswoman or whatever. Right? She was working at a car dealership. But yeah, and And I often wonder about that, right? I took, my ninth grade year, I make it to the Alamo. I asked the folks at the Alamo, okay, so I have a question for you. So when they arrested everyone at the Alamo, and they lined everyone up, all the guys, and they basically executed these guys, and the historian at the Alamo says, yes, they did. That's how brutal the Mexican army was. They just executed all the guys. And I said, so did anyone leave? Because I already knew the answer. And he was like, yeah, the women left. And I said, so there were no men who left? And he was like, well, any guy who fought against them, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, so what about those slave men? Were they allowed to leave? And he said, oh, well, yes, those men were allowed to leave. And I said, why? And he was like, well, that opens up a whole can of worms, is what he told me. Because we were sitting there with it was a whole group of people, which led me, which kind of leads us down this path. And now once you start looking at this, then you find out a lot of things. But ultimately, uh, Texas makes his way. Um, so Abraham Lincoln. So Stephen F. Austin in August of 1835 makes his way to Mexico City to go talk to the Mexican government. And he says, okay, listen, I came down here to talk to you about something. I was wondering, could we bring more immigrants in from the United States? Because we have some people who want to come here. Also, uh, could we build a church? Because we're not Catholic. Like, can we build like a Protestant church? Because this is not really who we are. Um, we want to build a couple of churches if that's fine. Also, how about some more money, for us so that we can teach our kids in English? because a lot of the kids are having a hard time with the Spanish and things like that. And the Mexican government basically said, yeah, nah, we're not going to give you all that, but we will give you a jail cell. And they locked the guy up, right? Which it seemed to have made a lot of people mad, which ultimately was, if they were walking that fine line of being upset or not, that pushed them over. And it led us to ultimately having a battle, right? Um, and the Alamo seemed to be the battle to slow the people down, so that the army can train under Sam Houston. And they met on Washington, the Brazos on March 2nd, 1836, to write out the Declaration of Independence. This is Texas Independence Day, when what the Texans said, we want to be free. And it ultimately is written out in Washington, Nebraska. I don't know if any of you ever been out there. It's a nice little place you can go see. Some of the structures are still there. It's hard to get any service unless you have AT&T. I have T-Mobile, so there's no service out there. But it's a great little place to go and visit. But ultimately, there's a war in Texas, um, and the Texans, well, not the Texans, but the people in favor of breaking away from Mexico ultimately wins. I always try to remind students that when you're in a U.S. government class, and I know that students are like, he is really beating this dead horse. I just want you to understand that in the American Revolution, it wasn't us against the British, because that would just be a war. It wouldn't be a revolution. Like, it's us against us. It's a group of us against another group of us. It's a civil war that you win becomes a revolution, right? If these folks in Texas would have lost this war, it would have been a civil war. That's it. But since they won, it was a revolution. So these are people fighting against themselves in a sense. But ultimately, the folks in Texas won. Um, after Santa Anna, he was defeated. Um, uh, My gosh, I forgot. I forgot where it was at. It's in the Houston area. I forgot the name of the city. I'm sorry, people. But anyway, he was defeated out there. But here's the thing about this. I talked to when I was in Mexico. I was in Mexico as a foreign exchange student, and and they paired me with a guy from Mexico, who is now a professor at the university. Uh, Benito Juarez, down there. But anyway, I asked him, I said, what are your views on Santa Ana? And he said this, we don't like him. I was like, why? They said, because he sold Texas. And I was like, what do you mean he sold Texas? Yeah, he sold Texas. I said, he didn't, who did he sell Texas to? He sold Texas to y'all. And I was like, no, we had a war. He was like, nah, it wasn't a war. They just made that up. They sold Texas. And I was like, we have buildings. I don't think people just lined up and shot the building to create a story. Like, I don't really know if this is what's happening here. And he's like, yeah, it was just all made up. It was sold. So I don't know if you've ever heard this story, but when you talk to people who have, have studied this, in Mexico, I've heard this many times since. That there are a lot of people in Mexico who believe that Santa Ana sold Texas. And so whether or not Texas was sold or whether or not Texas won, there we go. We get this here, and now Texas becomes a nation, and the presidents had a 3-year term, right? They had a 3-year term limit. The Constitution is small, right? Because it's flexible, because it's a national constitution. As Clark said, the Constitution of South Carolina long. Well, Texas is even longer than that, and Alabama I believe, is the longest. Texas is like a second, right? But with that, right, with a national constitution, it can be short because it's flexible. because it's supposed to be interpreted in many different ways and things like that, right? So that's the whole idea of that. Um, and you don't have to write this, but just know that about 12% of the population, when the war ended, were slaves. And by 1860, 30% of the population were made up of slaves. Just to give you an idea and things like that. So it basically said that you can come to Texas, bring your slaves with you. It banned the importation, but it had also banned the importation of slaves. But our national government had also banned the importation of slaves anyway, right? But you didn't need to import any slaves when they were just making new ones with the biggest slaves who they can find. Okay. Okay. So let's take a look at this here. So this slide is a very good one because hopefully you can see it well. As you can see, it's first off, her in the middle. That's us. That's Texas. All right. We are the beautiful state of Texas that everyone wants to court and things like that. Well, actually, not everyone. As you can see, right, we have the president there, James K. Polk, who was welcoming us in, right, and, hoping that we will ultimately join them. We have Henry Clay there, who's an uppity guy looking down on Texas, saying that we're full of criminals and crooks and gamblers and things like this. Like, why do you want these people here? These guys are horse racers and all this here. You got the Quakers out there not liking us. So it's a bunch of stuff going on, right? And you got people in the back saying, "Hey, he who has never done anything wrong, why don't they cast the first stone?" I mean, because everybody has done something wrong. So I just want you to understand that Texas, um, that Texas is being courted by some, and by others not so much. Okay, so this is the part where I get to talk to you about Texas and get to put the rest things that you've heard from folks that are probably that have not been that are not true, and I kind of give you an insight on how Texas made its way here into the union. Um, so Polk, he takes over as president, and Polk, he decides. It was this thing that we had at a national level called Manifest Destiny. I'm sure you've heard of this. This is where we are trying to reach from one ocean to the other ocean, right? How do we get land from Atlantic Ocean all the way to the Pacific Ocean? Well, you just move westward. It's easy, right? Let's get to Oregon if we can and get that land, and then we'll have all the stuff that we ultimately need. Well, so Polk gets in, and and now he's supposed to be moving westward, but he stops. And some reason he focuses all his attention on Texas. He's like, "We need Texas. Let's go get Texas," right? Now people are like, "What are you doing, James? Come on, Mr. President. Like, why are you going down south when you're supposed to be going westward?" He's like, "No, no, I know what I'm doing, right? I'm trying to go get to Texas, right?" And it became this huge argument, right? This huge debate. My question to you is, I just want your thoughts on it, or you might know the answer. Why is Polk so focused on Texas instead of just trying to get to Oregon? Why do you think?
Balance the slave states. Texas is slave, and a lot of them other states, like everybody wanted California at the time, and Texas, but Texas being a slave state, wasn't any slavery in California. So all these states, as we move outward, they had that 1820 compromise. And for every slave state, there had to be a free state. And that was the push. If you let Texas in, then you have Missouri and those future states, Oklahoma and all those, to keep a balance. That was Polk's deal. And he was only a one-term president anyway, so he didn't care. But
Okay.
if
Well-
you bring California in, it's going to be free. So you have to balance slave with free states.
Okay. Now here's the issue with that part. He could have moved across and not worry about California, which is what a lot of people were saying. Just keep moving that way. Plus, people looked at Texas because that's who they were. A lot of our heroes in Texas were murderers and crooks. They had murdered people. They did a lot of things. Like one of the guys, his wife, she was cheating on him. He killed her and the guy she was cheating with, on him with, and then he ran to Texas, right? Because it was a safe place. So there are a lot of people who did not want Texas, and it had nothing to do with the slaves. But as we look at Polk had his eye on the prize, which in turn. So let me ask you this. So Polk is focused on Manifest Destiny. Everything he's doing is based on Manifest Destiny, right? I just want you to understand, right? This, in his mind, has nothing to do with the slavery issue. It has to do with going from one ocean to another. And so with that in mind, right? Why is he looking at Texas? And ultimately the issue. Oh shoot, sorry. Ultimately, the issue is this: is that Polk thought to himself that Texas, that two Anglo nations, as he wrote, cannot survive next to each other without one swallowing up the other. Two Anglo nations weren't going to be able to survive without one taking over the other. In his mind, right, the United States won a war against Britain, right? But that was a long time ago. And Britain was like 3 months away, right, or something. I don't know how long it takes on a boat, a ship back then, but it was a long time. These guys, they won a war right next door. These are where the criminals go. These are where our murderers go. They run there to safety in Texas after they've done something. It's like breaking the law here and running to Mexico. Well, they broke the law there and they came here to Mexico, which is Texas, right? And now Texas is a nation. It's an Anglo nation. And to Clark's point, and you did touch on something, Clark, that was on Polk's mind. Who do you think is more likely to get the state of California to join them? Do you think is the United States, who doesn't speak the language or understand the culture? Or do you think that it is the nation of Texas that clearly understands the culture, clearly understands the people, and is able to communicate in the language? And it scared Polk. So what did he do? He took Texas, or he went and he got Texas to join. And he was nervous because with that, a lot of people say that Texas is the only state that can leave the Union. No, he did not allow for that. He put in there that Texas can split into 5 states. He never agreed for Texas to leave because he knew that if Texas left, Texas might be its own nation and swallow up the entire United States. This was in Polk's mind. Now, once Texas agreed to join, as Clark said, the Kansas-Nebraska Act said that it had to be equal, right? It allows states to, Kansas-Nebraska Act passed first, which allows for states to choose to be free or slave. And ultimately, we had to have a balance, which is why Texas came in at 28, right? Because we had to have a free state first, and before we had a slave state join. But ultimately, we got them to join because we didn't want them to take over the United States. As we know, once you become a state constitution, you become a longer constitution. And that's what we got here, right? We got the Constitution of 1845, right? Where the slave state, Texas is a slave state, but it was, we get this, it was fine because it was even. The Constitution is twice as long as the previous one, right? Texas did have to pay its debt, which Texas ultimately lost some land and things like that. And they joined. Now we have a governor who serves every 2 years. I'm sorry, who serves 2 year terms, and our Congress meets every other year. As you can see, Texas from the start, once it became a state, was already meeting every other year. All right. These old constitutions, if you check them out and look them up, I don't know if any of you are into stuff like that, then you'll see them. And I'm sure it's like this in other states. You'll see the state legislators creating new cities like Corsicana and all these kinds of city, and they actually go through it and they create these cities and things like that. And a lot of these cities that they were named after people who fought in the Texas Revolution. So, as we know, because we talked about this, we get the 1845 Constitution, which was a state constitution, and now Texas is supposedly a state in the Confederacy, right? Texas leaves February of 1861, and as I mentioned, Abraham Lincoln hasn't even taken office yet. He didn't take office until May 4th, and the states are gone. So, Texas joined the Confederacy, and it basically says that slavery is protected. And I guess if you have slaves, you got to keep them. It declared the freeing of slaves illegal. Okay. And as we know from a previous slide, the population in 1860 um, of slaves in the state was about 30%. I just want you to understand it's the same. So this Constitution here and this Constitution are the same. It was basically the same Constitution. So we have this Constitution and this Constitution were the same. The only difference is this said, United States or whatever. This right here made it part of the Confederacy, but it also says that that freeing slaves is illegal. All right. The previous Constitution also protected slavery because Texas was a slave state. As Mr. Clark mentioned, Mr. Wilson mentions, right? But in this one, it protected slavery, but it also said that you had to keep them. All right. So now we get the war. That's all over. Boom. Now we get to 1866, where Texas rejoins the United States. And with that, right, you have to apologize for what you did and all this here. Ultimately, Andrew Johnson pardons everyone in the South and things like that who fought against the North. And slavery is abolished. We get these freedmen rights, which is essentially rights for people who have been newly freed. These newly freed people that they now have rights, right? But you can't vote and you can't hold office. So around this time, right? I was like, this is around the time when uh when when my family um ultimately got went from who we were to who we are now, right? And what I mean was that after the war and they freed the slaves, my my great grandfather, um, he was freed, but then he asked the people if he could stay with them after and work, and he took the last name, and that's how we got our last name Hawkins. Those folks are still there. The whites, who we got our last name from, are still in Brazoria County, right? And that's where we got our last name from. So we got the freedmen's right. These rights were, of people, and now people are being paid and things like this. And instead of a bunch of people living in this little small house, it was him. And he took a wife who was a lot younger than him. I'll put it like that. And which ended up being my great grandmother, but ultimately, which led to where we are now. And a lot of people end up inheriting last names at this time and choosing last name because we had no last name. Then we know what happened after that. We get Mr. Davis here, E.J. Davis, all right? So we get the Constitution of 1869, where E.J. Davis is clearly, he plays a huge role in this convention here, where now the governor is going to have all this power. The governor's term is now going to be 4 years. He gets to appoint all these major offices in government. And as I mentioned in the past, yes, Texas passed. Texas agreed to the 13th Amendment, which said that the slaves are free. The 14th Amendment, which ultimately said that the slaves are citizens, are naturalized citizens, or the former slaves are naturalized citizens, and the 15th Amendment, which said that they can vote. Well, I'm sorry, a black man could vote, right? Um, but that was because of the radical Republicans, and that was because the people who fought with the South, um, part of the Confederacy, could not vote or hold office. So that's how they were able to force things through and stuff like that. Um, all right, everybody. Thank y'all. It was a great lecture. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Always bringing your insight. And everyone, I will see you all next week. Please be safe. And, football starts tonight at the NFL. So make sure you check that out. All right.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
All right, you too. Thank you.